Some of the biggest real estate investors like Graham Stephan, Thach Nugent, Chris Crone all seem to have unlimited funds when it comes to buying real estate. But the only difference between you and someone like them is one very important thing: knowledge. Having the power of knowledge is huge. Today, I'm gonna share with you how these big investors finance all of their deals and how they can get creative when financing. I'm gonna take you through some of the best ways you can finance your next real estate deal. Let's talk. Welcome to Real Estate Talk. Today, I'm gonna go over the best ways that you can finance any real estate investment. Whether you're a first-time investor or this is your 50th time doing it, I'm gonna give you some options on how the biggest real estate investors do it. I found over my career that there are definitely better ways to finance certain types of projects. Each type of project requires a different and maybe a creative way to finance. And there are so many different types of projects out there that you could do. Let's talk about the different types of projects that you may be interested in. Stick around to the end because the last one is gonna be my favorite way of how to do a certain project. All right, there are so many different types of real estate projects and investments out there, but the most common one is simply just buying a property as a rental. The goal with this type of property is to simply you buy an existing property, maybe that's already fully renovated, you put a tenant in, and it immediately cash flows. In the most recent survey done by the Census Bureau, there are approximately 20 million rental properties in the US, and that's about 13.8% of the 144 million available homes. Another type of project you may be interested in is the auctions or foreclosures. This is just simply when someone can't pay their mortgage anymore or someone passes away and their mortgage isn't being paid, the bank will sell that house. And with over 22,000 homes going to foreclosure in just the first half of this year, there's definitely a lot to choose from. Another type of investment property, not usually as common because it requires a lot more money, is commercial property. These are gonna be your strip malls, business locations, things like that, but they're just not as common, like I said, because they cost more money to fund. There's definitely a lot more risk in this, but the income can be a lot more sustained. Another type of real estate investment that is pretty new onto the scene compared to just real estate in general is what's known as a REIT, or a real estate investment trust. And honestly, this works exactly like the stock market does. This is where a bunch of investors come together, they pool their money, they send it off to a big company that buys rental property, and next thing you know, you're a real estate investor. Now, with all of this info, how on earth do you, a regular person, figure out what type of financing is right for you and the project you want to do? And how do the biggest names find what's best for them? Well, let's break down each area so you can determine what is the best for you. Let's start at the beginning with buying a simple property that you want to hold as a rental. This is where you're going to leverage what's called a conventional loan. A conventional loan is basically going to be a minimum of 20% that you have to put down. There are going to be some banks, and in some cases, that require more, and there's going to be certain times where you may want to put more than 20% down. This type of loan is very simple. So let's do an example. Let's say you have a property that's worth $150,000. The mortgage would look something a little like this. Down payment of 20% is $30,000. Let's say you amortize it over 30 years and you happen to get an interest rate of about 8.25%. If you factor in your mortgage payment, your taxes and insurance, your monthly payment is going to be around $1,066. That number can change depending on what state you live in, depending on how your taxes are. With that in mind, you also want to factor in certain maintenance expenses, pest control, maybe you have a lawn service, whatever the case is, you want to factor in all your maintenance. And let's just say that averages to about, if you happen to have property management, you can easily add 8 to 10% more. Once you add all that up, you'll have a minimum amount that you need to make in order to break even. But who gets into the rental game just to break even? So you want to make sure that with all those expenses added up, that you can easily get market rent and still cash flow. If all of your expenses add up to $1,200 a month, you want to make sure you can at least cash flow $200, $300, $400 a month. So you need to make sure that rent can get to about $1,600, $1,500. As a caveat with every property, there's definitely a lot of due diligence that you want to do to make sure you find the right property, buy it at the right time, you get the right mortgage, you buy once and you buy right. The next type of loan is something that Pace Morby loves to talk about. He's very big on this and it's a great option. It's called an assumption and it sounds exactly like what you may be thinking. You are assuming someone else's mortgage. But there are a few specific rules to these mortgages that you want to know about. Conventional loans are typically not assumable, but usually FHA, VA, and USDA loans are. But as a buyer, you have to qualify for that current loan that that current seller has. Now, what's the benefit of doing something like this? Well, in a time right now where interest rates are a little higher, let's say the seller or current owner has a really low interest rate. If you qualify for that loan, you could easily get 2, 3, 4% lower interest rate without having to qualify for today's rates. That can save you hundreds and hundreds of dollars every single month on your mortgage payment. Okay, let's talk about foreclosed houses. This is my personal favorite, and I love doing foreclosed houses because you can usually get them really cheap. But just because they're cheap don't mean they're free, right? So how on earth do you find financing and get creative to get money for a foreclosed house? It can be a little tricky, but let's talk through it. Typically, when you're buying a foreclosed house and you're going to an auction, you're gonna need one thing: cash, or what can be seen as cash. Let me explain that. Not everyone has tens of thousands of dollars just sitting around in cold hard cash, right? So how do you get around this? What is the creative way to finance a foreclosed auction house? There's two main ways that I like to go about it, and many of other investors do the same thing: hard money loans and lines of credit. So a line of credit is very simple. A line of credit is access to a line that has a certain amount of money on it, and it is usually held against an asset that you own. That asset can be equity in a house, that asset can be pure hard cash. Whatever it is, you just need to give the bank something as collateral for that line of credit. Hard money loans, we're kind of the same way, but instead of using cash, they are usually tied to a house. Big benefits of lines of credit and hard money loans are the fact that you don't need good credit, and typically the fees and out-of-pocket expenses are really, really low, if there's any. Now, it definitely sounds too good to be true, right? There has to be a catch. Well, there kind of is. Typically, interest rates are a lot higher than on a conventional loan. You could easily get 1, 2, 3% higher than any other loan you're gonna get. And the monthly payments aren't structured exactly like a loan. These monthly payments are gonna be set to interest only. So every time you're making that monthly payment, it's not going towards your principal, it's just paying them for using their money. And usually another downside is they are short term. So if you plan on holding something for a very long time, don't use a hard money loan or a line of credit for a long-term solution. That's where you refinance. Moving on to commercial properties, this is where things get a little more difficult. To finance these, they require a lot more due diligence, a lot more cash, and a lot more experience. They usually also have very strict requirements. With that said, they actually work very similar to a conventional loan. With a conventional loan, you're gonna need 20% down as a minimum. Usually 25 to 30 is recommended. And once you own this piece of property, you're usually gonna have 2, 3, 4 different types of businesses as tenants. They pay you in rent, and now you have cash flow. One big difference is a lot of these leases aren't for just 1 year. A lot of times they're for 5, 10, 15 years. So it's a lot longer of a commitment, which means you have to make sure that that business is good at what they do and they're gonna cash flow themselves. So the concept is definitely the same as getting a simple rental house. You have a certain amount of rents that have to offset your expenses. Now, let's talk about my favorite way to finance a property. This is actually gonna be a combination of a few other things that we talked about previously, and it is a huge, huge thing that Thats Nguyen talks about all the time. If done right, this combination can actually produce an infinite amount of financing for your properties. This method is known as the BRRRR method. The BRRRR method stands for buy, renovate, rent, refinance, and repeat. There's a big reason that a lot of investors use this method. It's tried and true. So let's talk about exactly how it works. First thing is you want to identify a property that is ugly, rundown, distressed, and in a good area where you can renovate and make good money. So first, you can use a line of credit to get this whole process started. You buy your very first property, and then you can use a hard money loan, use the house as collateral, and renovate the property. Once you've done that, you figure out what the top market value is for your area for that house. You find a renter, and you get it rented out. Once you find a renter, you go to a bank and say, hey, I have a renter, this is how much it is. I want to get a refinance, or what you would call a cash out refinance. You refinance the property, you take that equity and you hold on to that, because we're going to do something with it. What are you going to do with it? You're going to take that equity and you're going to hold on to it and roll it right into the next property. Don't take any of that cash that you just made and put it into your bank account. Uncle Sam will come for you and hit you with capital gains taxes. Don't let that happen. And eventually, once you have enough properties built up and enough equity, you'll eventually have enough money and enough equity built up to just start purchasing other properties without ever having to touch hard money loan again. And just like that, you've done exactly what other investors have done before you. You have just figured out the secret to real estate investing, and an infinite glitch to never losing financing. If you like this method and are interested at all in learning how to BRRRR property the right way, click right here.